The wind howled across the frozen city like a dying animal. Ice covered everything on Zephyria Prime. The tall crystal towers that once glowed with warm light now stood dark and cold. Snow fell in thick sheets, burying the streets where millions of Zephyrians once walked. Lyrics pressed closer to her grandmother in their small hiding place. The 8-year-old's body shook from the cold. Her skin, normally a soft blue color that glowed like moonlight, had turned pale gray. "Tell me the story again, grandmother," Lyrics whispered. Her breath came out in small clouds. The old Zephyrian's voice was weak. "Which story, little spark?" "The one about the fire-bringers." Grandmother's eyes flickered with the last of her inner light. "Long ago, when our world was young, visitors came from the stars. They brought fire that could burn without fuel. They saved our people when the first great cold came." Lyrics had heard this story many times. She loved how grandmother's voice would sing the old words. But now the voice was just a whisper. "Are they real, grandmother?" "I believe they are, child. They came once. Maybe they will come again." Outside their shelter, the ice storm grew stronger. 3 days ago, something had gone wrong with the planet's heating system. The machines that kept Zephyria Prime warm had stopped working. Now the whole world was freezing. Lyrics thought about the heating stations scattered across the planet. They were beautiful machines made of living crystal that grew with the planet itself. Her people had built them over thousands of years. They turned the planet's heat into energy that warmed the cities and powered their technology. But the machines were delicate. When the main control center failed, all of them stopped working at once. The Zephyrian engineers tried to fix them, but their tools needed warmth to work. It was like trying to start a fire while drowning in ice water. "I'm scared, grandmother," Lyrics said. Tears started to form in her eyes. The tears of a Zephyrian were special. They glowed with inner light and felt warm on the skin. But now, as the tears ran down Lyrics's face, they began to freeze. The light in them grew dim. Grandmother saw the frozen tears and felt her heart break. She reached out with a shaking hand to touch Lyrics's face. "Don't cry, little one. Save your warmth." But Lyrics couldn't stop. She was too young to understand why the world was ending. All she knew was that everything was cold and dark, and the adults couldn't fix it. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the city dying. Crystal buildings cracked in the cold. The hum of power systems went quiet one by one. Sometimes they heard the calls of other Zephyrians looking for shelter, but those calls were getting fewer. The rescue ships had tried to help, but they couldn't fly in the ice storm. The snow was too thick and the wind too strong. Even the ships that made it to the ground couldn't take off again. Their engines froze solid. Lyrics's people talked to each other using sounds like singing. But the cold was making it hard to make those sounds. Soon, they might not be able to talk at all. Then they would be alone in the silence and the cold. "Grandmother, why can't we make fire like the fire-bringers?" Lyrics asked. The old Zephyrian smiled sadly. "We are not made for fire, child. We are made for harmony and growth. Fire is different. It destroys and creates at the same time. We never learned its secrets." Lyrics didn't understand, but she nodded anyway. She looked at her hands. They were supposed to glow with soft light, but now they were dim and cold. She tried to make them brighter by thinking warm thoughts, but it didn't work. A new sound came from outside, a deep rumbling that shook the ground. Both Lyrics and her grandmother looked up in fear. Was it another machine breaking down? But the sound was different. It wasn't the crack of crystal or the groan of metal. It was something else, something they had never heard before. Grandmother's eyes went wide. In all her years, she had heard many sounds. She knew the song of every machine on their world. She knew the call of every animal. But this sound was new. "What is it?" Lyrics whispered. Before grandmother could answer, the rumbling got louder. It seemed to be moving through the sky above them. Through a crack in their shelter's wall, Lyric saw a flash of light. Not the cold light of crystal or electricity, but something warmer. Something that reminded her of the old stories. Could it be? Grandmother whispered. The light got brighter. Whatever was making the sound was coming closer. Lyrics felt something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. Maybe the firebringers from the stories were real. Maybe they were coming to help. But then the rumbling changed to a loud crash. The light disappeared. Whatever had been in the sky was now on the ground, somewhere nearby. Lyrics and her grandmother looked at each other. Should they go outside to look? The storm was dangerous, and they might freeze before finding shelter again. But what if the crash was important? What if it was the help they needed? Grandmother made the choice. With effort that used the last of her strength, she stood up. Come, little spark. Let's see what the sky has brought us. Together, they stepped out into the ice storm to find the source of the strange light. Captain Elena Vasquez stared at the readings on her ship's screen. The numbers didn't make sense. She rubbed her tired eyes and looked again. Area, run that scan one more time, she said to her ship's computer. The artificial intelligence's voice was calm and electronic. Scan complete, Captain. The planet below shows massive temperature drop. Current surface temperature is minus 200 degrees. Multiple distress signals detected. Elena leaned back in her pilot's chair. The Times, Prometheus Times, was a salvage ship, designed to find broken spacecraft and valuable materials in deep space. Elena and her crew of 3 had been out here for 6 months, far from human space, looking for anything worth selling. But this was different. This wasn't a broken ship or floating scrap metal. This was an entire planet, crying for help. What kind of distress signals? Elena asked. Unknown language pattern, but the mathematical structure suggests extreme emergency. The signals are repeating in groups of sequences that indicate children in danger. Elena felt her stomach tighten. She had been a military engineer before becoming a salvager. She knew how to read emergency patterns, even from alien sources. And Arya was right. These weren't just calls for help. These were desperate parents trying to save their kids. Her crewmate Jake floated into the bridge. In the low gravity of space, he moved by pushing off the walls. Hey, Cap. What's got you looking so serious? Elena pointed at the screen. Take a look at this planet. Something bad is happening down there. Jake studied the readings. His face went pale. That's impossible. No planet gets that cold that fast. Unless their climate control failed, Elena finished. And from the looks of it, it failed hard. 2 more crew members joined them. Maria, their engineer, and Chen, their medic. All of them looked at the data with growing concern. Cap, Maria said slowly. Our ship isn't built for planetary rescue. We're a salvage crew. We don't have the equipment or supplies for this kind of operation. Elena knew Maria was right. The Times, Prometheus Times, was tough but simple. They had basic life support, some tools, and enough food for their planned journey. They weren't heroes. They were just people trying to make a living in space. Look at the storm systems, Chen added, pointing to the weather readings. Those ice storms would tear our ship apart before we even reached the surface. And even if we made it down, we'd probably never make it back up. Elena stared at the planet on the screen. It looked like a white marble, beautiful but deadly. She thought about the distress signals, the mathematical patterns that screamed about children in danger. Area, how many life signs are you detecting? Approximately 40 million, Captain. The number is decreasing rapidly. 40 million people were dying down there. And, from the signal patterns, many of them were children. Elena had seen a lot of bad things in space. Ships lost in the void. Crews frozen to death when their life support failed. pirates who killed without thinking twice. But this was different. This was an entire civilization facing extinction. Cap, Jake said quietly. I know what you're thinking. But we can't save them. We're just 4 people with a salvage ship. Elena looked at her crew. They were good people. They trusted her to keep them safe and make smart decisions. Taking their ship into those ice storms was not a smart decision. It was probably suicide. But Elena remembered something her grandmother had told her when she was young. When you see someone who needs help, the old woman had said, you help them. You don't think about the cost or the danger. You just help. She thought about her own childhood. When she was 7, her family's habitat had lost power during a solar storm. They would have died if a passing trader hadn't stopped to help. The trader had risked his ship and cargo to save strangers. Elena had never forgotten that kindness. Arya, analyze our ship's capabilities. Could we survive entry into that atmosphere? Probability of successful landing is 12%, Captain. Probability of successful takeoff after landing is 4%. So we'd probably die, Chen said. Probably, Elena agreed, but probably isn't the same as definitely. Maria shook her head. Elena, be reasonable. We can't risk 4 lives for a 12% chance. Elena looked at the distress signals again. The patterns were getting weaker. How long before those life signs go to 0? Creating. Also. At current rate of decrease, approximately 18 hours, Arya replied. 18 hours. That's how long an entire civilization had left. Elena made her decision. It wasn't based on logic or good sense. It was based on something deeper. Something that made humans different from other species in the galaxy. When someone was in trouble, humans helped, even when it was stupid, even when the odds were terrible. Area. Plot a course for the planet's surface. Look for the strongest concentration of distress signals. Captain, Jake said, are you sure about this? Elena looked at her crew. They were scared. And they had every right to be. But she saw something else in their eyes. They understood. They might complain and worry, but they would follow her down to that frozen world. No, Elena said honestly. I'm not sure about anything. But those signals, they're not just asking for help. They're asking for someone to care. And if we don't go, who will? Maria sighed. Well, I always said I wanted to see new worlds. Chen checked his medical supplies. If we're doing this crazy thing, we better do it right. Jake strapped himself into his station. 12% odds? I've seen worse. Elena smiled at her crew. This was why she loved working with humans. They were crazy enough to try impossible things. Arya, take us down, and try to keep us in one piece. The Prometheus Times turned toward the frozen planet and began its descent through the ice storm. The Prometheus Times hit the ground like a falling star. Metal screamed against ice as the ship skidded across the frozen surface. Inside, Elena and her crew held on tight as everything shook around them. When the crashing finally stopped, Elena looked at her instruments. Half of them were broken, but the ship's hull was still in one piece. That was what mattered. Everyone okay? She called out. Alive, Jake groaned from his station. Bruised, but alive. Maria was already checking the engine systems. We're not flying anywhere soon, Cap. The landing gear is twisted into scrap metal, and I think we cracked the main drive housing. Elena wasn't surprised. A 12% chance of successful landing meant an 88% chance of crashing. They had been lucky to survive at all. Life support? She asked Chen. Working, but using a lot of power. The heating systems are running at maximum, just to keep the inside of the ship warm. Elena put on her environmental suit. It was designed for the cold vacuum of space, with built-in heaters and air recycling. It would keep her alive outside. But not for long in these temperatures. "Stay here and keep the ship warm," she told her crew. "I'm going to look around." "See, Cap, that's not safe," Jake protested. "Nothing about this mission is safe," Elena replied. "But we came here to help, not to hide in the ship." She opened the airlock and stepped outside. The cold hit her like a physical blow, even through her heated suit. The ice storm was still going, but not as hard as before. Snow swirled around her, and the wind made strange howling sounds. But there was something else, a glow coming from beneath her ship. The Time's Prometheus * fusion engines were still hot from the landing. The heat was melting the ice around them, creating a small area of warmer ground. Elena looked around and saw shapes moving in the storm. At first, she thought they might be animals, but as they got closer, she realized they were people. Alien people, but definitely intelligent beings. They were tall and thin, with skin that seemed to be made of crystal. Their faces were beautiful in a strange way, like living gemstones. But they looked weak and cold, moving slowly through the snow. One of them was smaller than the others, a child. As Elena watched, the little alien stumbled and fell. An older alien, probably its grandmother, tried to help it up, but she was too weak. Elena didn't think. She just ran toward them. The aliens saw her coming and stopped moving. They had never seen anything like Elena before. She looked like a walking furnace, with steam rising from her heated suit. To them, she must have seemed like a creature made of fire. Elena knelt down next to the fallen child. Up close, she could see that it was crying. But the tears were strange. They glowed with soft light, like liquid stars, and they were freezing on the child's face, turning into tiny crystals. The sight broke Elena's heart. She had seen a lot of sadness in her life, but there was something about a crying child that cut through all barriers. It didn't matter that this child was alien. It was still a child in pain. Elena looked at her suit's heating system. If she removed one of the portable heater units, she could place it near the child. It would help warm the small alien, but it would also mean Elena would get colder. She didn't hesitate. Elena pulled off one of her heaters and placed it next to the child. Immediately, the area around the little alien became warmer. The frozen tears began to melt, and the child's skin started to glow a little brighter. The older alien looked at Elena with wide eyes. She said something in a language that sounded like singing, but Elena couldn't understand the words. However, she understood the meaning. It was gratitude. Elena's suit computer started working on the alien language. It would take time to translate, but the computer was smart enough to figure out basic communication patterns. "Can you understand me?" Elena said slowly, hoping the aliens had some way to translate too. The older alien tilted her head and made more singing sounds. Elena's computer picked up the patterns and started making sense of them. After a few minutes, Elena heard a mechanical voice from her suit speakers. Translation attempt. "Firebringer, from the stars. Thank you for your warmth." Elena blinked in surprise. Firebringer? That was an interesting way to describe a human. She pointed to herself and said clearly, "Human." The alien pointed to herself and made a sound that Elena's computer translated as grandmother. Then she pointed to the child and said something that translated as lyrics. Elena smiled, even though the aliens couldn't see her face through her helmet. "Hello, lyrics. Hello, grandmother." She looked around at the frozen world and then back at the aliens. Using simple gestures and words that her computer could translate, Elena asked, "What happened? Why is everything cold?" Grandmother's explanation came slowly, with lots of pauses for translation. But Elena started to understand. The planet had machines that kept it warm, but something had gone wrong. All the machines had stopped working at the same time. The aliens' technology couldn't function in the extreme cold, so they couldn't fix the problem. Elena thought about what she had heard. It sounded like a cascade failure in the climate control system, something that happened when one part of a connected system failed and caused all the other parts to fail too. As an engineer, Elena had seen cascade failures before. They were tricky to fix because you had to restart the whole system at once. You couldn't just repair one part at a time. But Elena had something the aliens didn't: human engineering. Human machines were built tough and simple. They were designed to work in harsh conditions, like the cold vacuum of space or the inside of an exploding star. "Where are the machines?" Elena asked, using gestures and simple words. Grandmother pointed toward the horizon and said something that translated as, "the deep place, the heart of the world." Elena understood. The main climate control system was probably deep underground, at the planet's core. It would be a long, dangerous journey through the ice storm. But if they could reach it, Elena might be able to fix what the aliens couldn't. She looked at little Lyrics, who was sitting close to Elena's heater. The child's tears were no longer freezing, and she was starting to look healthier. Elena made a decision that would change everything. She was going to try to save this world, even if it killed her. "We help," Elena said in the aliens' language, as best she could. "We fix the machines." Grandmother's eyes grew wide with hope. She said something that Elena's computer translated as, "The Firebringers have returned. End honor. End honor." Elena didn't understand what that meant, but she nodded anyway. She had work to do. Elena walked back to her ship with Grandmother and Lyrics following behind. The heat from the times, Prometheus times, had created a warm bubble around the crash site. For the first time in days, the aliens could move without shivering. "Jake, Maria, Chen," Elena called over her radio. "Come outside. We have guests." Her crew came out of the ship wearing their environmental suits. When they saw the aliens, they stopped and stared. Meeting new, intelligent life was something humans had dreamed about for centuries. Now it was happening in the middle of a rescue mission. "They're beautiful," Chen whispered. "And dying," Elena added. "Their planet's climate control system failed. We need to help them fix it." Maria looked around at the frozen wasteland. "Cap, we're salvage workers, not miracle workers. How are we supposed to fix an entire planet?" Elena had been thinking about this problem during the walk back to the ship. The way humans always fix things, with stubbornness and spare parts. She explained what she had learned from Grandmother. The Climate Control Center was located deep underground, thousands of miles away from their current position. The journey would take them across a frozen continent in the middle of an ice storm. "That's impossible," Jake said. "Our ship can't fly, and we don't have land vehicles that could handle this terrain." Elena looked at the Times Prometheus asterisk. The ship couldn't fly anymore, but it still had working fusion engines and an intact hull. "Who says we need to fly?" Over the next few hours, Elena and her crew did what humans did best. They improvised. Using tools from their ship and some of the aliens' broken technology, they began to modify the Times Prometheus Times into something that had never been built before. They removed the landing thrusters and mounted them on the sides of the ship like giant heating units. The fusion reactor could power them to create a moving, warm zone. They welded metal plates to the bottom of the ship to work like skis on the ice. "This is crazy," Maria said, as she helped Elena install the new heating system. "We're turning a spaceship into a heated sled." "Crazy is what humans do," Elena replied. "Besides, do you have a better idea?" Maria grinned. "Nope. Let's build this thing." The aliens watched in amazement as the humans worked. Grandmother translated what she could, explaining to other Zephyrian survivors who had found their way to the warm crash site. "They take apart their skyship to make it walk on the ground," she told them in her singing voice. "The Firebringers think differently than we do." Lyrics stayed close to Elena while she worked. The human fascinated the child. Elena's movements were quick and efficient, and she talked to herself while she worked. Okay, if we connect this heating element to the main power coupling, and then run a bypass through the secondary systems, Elena muttered as she crawled under the ship with her tools. What is she saying? Lyrics asked Grandmother. I think she is talking to the machines, Grandmother replied, teaching them to work in new ways. Elena overheard the translation and laughed. Something like that, kid. Sometimes you have to explain to machines what you want them to do, even when they don't want to do it. Quote, Chen was working on medical supplies, trying to figure out how to keep the aliens healthy during the journey. Elena, their body chemistry is different from ours. I'm not sure our medical equipment will work on them. Do what you can, Elena said. The most important thing is to keep them warm. Jake was looking at maps of the planet that they had downloaded from orbit. The route to the Climate Control Center goes through some really bad terrain. Mountains, canyons, and areas where the storm is even worse. Elena paused in her work. How long will it take? At the speed this contraption will probably move? 10 days across a frozen wasteland in a converted spaceship. Elena had to admit it sounded impossible. But she had learned something during her years in space. Impossible just meant it hadn't been done yet. Word spread among the surviving Zephyrians about the humans and their plan. More aliens arrived at the crash site, drawn by the warmth and the hope of rescue. Soon there were over 100 Zephyrians gathered around the ship. Grandmother told them the old stories while the humans worked. Stories about firebringers who had visited their world long ago, bringing warmth to the people during another time of great cold. Are we really like the firebringers from their legends? Chen asked Elena during a work break. Elena shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe humans just have a habit of showing up when people need fire. On the third day, the Times Prometheus Times was ready for its new mission. The ship looked like no vehicle that had ever been built. It had heating elements sticking out from all sides, metal skis attached to the bottom, and a jury-rigged control system that Elena had cobbled together from spare parts. Will it work? Maria asked. It better, Elena replied, because this is the only plan we've got. The humans and aliens loaded supplies into the ship. Food, tools, spare heaters, and everything else they might need for the journey. The alien technology was beautiful but delicate, while the human equipment was rough but reliable. Elena watched Lyrics help load supplies. The child was getting stronger now that she had access to regular warmth. Her crystal skin glowed brighter, and her eyes sparkled with curiosity about the strange humans. You really think we can fix their world? Jake asked Elena quietly. Elena looked out at the frozen landscape. Then, at the aliens working alongside her crew. Jake, I've seen humans do impossible things before. We've survived in space, built cities on dead worlds, and figured out how to make coffee taste good in zero gravity. Fixing one broken planet? That's just another Tuesday. Jake laughed. When you put it like that, it sounds easy. It's not easy, Elena said seriously. It's just necessary. As the sun set over the frozen world, Elena started the modified engines of the Times Prometheus Asterisk. Heat blazed from the ship's new heater arrays, creating a moving zone of warmth in the deadly cold. The impossible journey to save Zephyria Prime was about to begin. All aboard the crazy train, Elena announced over the ship's speakers. Next stop, the center of the planet. The ship began to move across the ice, leaving a trail of melted snow behind it. Inside the warm hull, humans and aliens worked together, united by hope and desperation. They were going to save this world or die trying. And in Elena's experience, humans were very hard to kill. 9 days later, the modified Times, Prometheus Times, reached the entrance to the planet's core facility. The journey had been harder than anyone expected. They had crossed frozen mountains, survived avalanches, and pushed through storms that would have destroyed any normal vehicle. But Elena's crazy plan had worked. The ship's heating systems had kept everyone alive, and the alien survivors had learned to work with human technology. Lyrics had become Elena's unofficial assistant, handing her tools and learning human words like wrench and stubborn bolt. The entrance to the core facility was a massive opening in the ground, leading down into the planet's heart. Ancient Zephyrian machines lined the walls, but they were all dark and cold. "This is it," Grandmother said, her voice echoing in the cavern. Elena looked down into the darkness. Emergency lighting from their ship showed metal pathways leading deeper underground. Somewhere down there was the master control system that could save Zephyria Prime. "How far down?" Elena asked. "Many miles," Grandmother replied. "The heart of our world beats very deep." Elena strapped on her portable equipment and checked her heating system. "Jake, Maria, Chen, you stay here and keep the ship warm. I'm going down with Grandmother and Lyrics." "Cap, you shouldn't go alone," Jake protested. "I won't be alone," Elena said, looking at the two aliens. "I'll have the best guides on the planet." The three of them took an elevator that was designed for Zephyrian bodies. It was beautiful, made of singing crystal, but it barely worked in the cold. Elena had to tap it with her wrench several times to keep it moving. "Human engineering technique?" Grandmother asked. "Percussive maintenance," Elena explained. "Sometimes machines just need a little encouragement." As they descended, Lyrics asked Elena questions about Earth and humans. The child was fascinated by the idea of a world where fire could burn naturally, without special machines to contain it. "Do human children cry fire tears too?" Lyrics asked. Elena smiled inside her helmet. "No. But our tears can be warm, when we're happy or sad. All human feelings are a little bit like fire." When they finally reached the core facility, Elena was amazed by what she saw. The chamber was enormous, filled with crystalline machines that seemed to grow from the rock itself. At the center was a control panel covered in symbols that pulsed with dim light. "Your people built this?" Elena asked. "Our ancestors grew it," Grandmother corrected. "It took 1,000 years to make these machines become part of the planet." "Grew." Elena approached the control panel. Her suit's computer began scanning the alien technology, trying to understand how it worked. The system was incredibly complex, far more advanced than anything humans had built. But advanced didn't always mean better. As Elena studied the readouts, she began to understand what had gone wrong. "It's a cascade failure," she told Grandmother. "One small part broke, and then the safety systems shut down everything else to prevent damage. The problem is, your machines are so careful about not hurting themselves that they won't restart automatically." "Can you fix it?" Lyrics asked hopefully. Elena looked at the alien technology. It was elegant and beautiful, designed to last for thousands of years. But it was also incredibly delicate. The Zephyrians had built their machines to be perfect, which meant they couldn't handle unexpected problems. Human technology was different. Humans built things that were tough and simple, designed to work even when everything went wrong. Elena's tools were crude compared to the crystal machines, but they were also flexible. "I can't fix your machines," Elena said slowly. "But I think I can convince them to fix themselves." She pulled out her portable computer and began connecting it to the alien control system. It was like trying to teach a symphony orchestra to play rock music. The technologies were completely different, but maybe they could work together. Elena's computer couldn't understand the complex Zephyrian systems, but it could send simple commands. Start, stop, reset. Sometimes simple was better than complex. "Warning. Incompatible systems detected," Elena's computer announced. "Override the warning," Elena ordered. "Sometimes you have to be incompatible to get things done." She began typing commands, using human logic to solve alien problems. Instead of trying to understand how the crystalline machines worked, she focused on what they needed to do: restart the planet's heating system. "What are you doing?" Grandmother asked. I'm being rude to your machines, Elena explained. Sometimes, complex systems need someone to come in and ignore all the safety protocols. Elena found the main restart sequence and prepared to activate it. But the alien system demanded an authorization code that she didn't have. Do you know the restart code? She asked Grandmother. The old Zephyrian looked confused. There is no restart code. The machines are supposed to know when to restart themselves. The fine like, this cap tooted every 3-3. The piece of 1717. Elena stared at the screen. The system was waiting for authorization that would never come, because the Zephyrians had never planned for this kind of failure. Well, Elena said, if you don't have a key, sometimes you have to kick down the door. She stood up and looked at the control panel. It was made of beautiful, delicate crystal that had been grown over centuries. Elena felt bad about what she was going to do next. I'm sorry about this, she said to the machines. Then she kicked the control panel with her heavy boot. The crystal surface cracked, warning lights flashed. And then, slowly, the system began to restart. No authorization needed, Elena said with satisfaction. Sometimes the best security system is the one that doesn't work. Deep beneath them, they heard the sound of ancient machinery coming back to life. The planet's heating system began to restart, section by section, spreading warmth through the frozen world. Lyrics laughed with joy as her crystal skin began to glow brighter. It's working. The world is getting warm again. Grandmother looked at Elena with wonder. You saved our world by breaking it? Elena grinned. Human engineering, Grandmother. When something doesn't work, we hit it until it does. They rode the elevator back to the surface, where Elena's crew was waiting with good news. The ship's instruments showed that temperatures around the planet were rising. The ice storms were weakening. Zephyria Prime was coming back to life. Over the following days, Elena and her crew helped the Zephyrians rebuild their world. They showed the aliens how to make backup systems that wouldn't fail all at once. They taught them human concepts like redundancy and fail-safe design. In return, the Zephyrians shared their technology and their culture. Elena learned to appreciate the beauty of their crystalline art and the harmony of their singing language. Lyrics became Elena's shadow, learning everything she could about human engineering. The child was fascinated by the way humans solved problems, not with elegant equations, but with creativity and stubbornness. Will you stay on our world? Lyrics asked one day, as they watched the sun set over a city that was glowing with renewed life. Elena looked at the child's hopeful face. For a while, she promised. Someone needs to teach you how to kick machines properly. Years later, when Lyrics had grown up and become an engineer herself, she would tell her own children the story of the Firebringers. She would explain how sometimes the universe sends exactly what you need, even if it arrives in the most unexpected way. The humans didn't save us with advanced technology, Lyrics would say. They saved us because they cared, and because they were stubborn enough to try impossible things. Elena's ship was eventually repaired and upgraded with Zephyrian technology. When she and her crew finally left the planet, they took with them new friends, new knowledge, and a new understanding of what it meant to be human. But they also left something behind. The knowledge that in the galaxy's darkest moments, humans would always show up to help. Not because it was profitable or logical, but because it was right. And in the ice storms that still sometimes swept across Zephyria Prime, children would look up at the sky and remember the story of the Firebringer who kicked a machine and saved the world. Some problems, after all, just needed the human touch.